Now we will get started with the session. Thank you so much for coming. This is an exec curated panel on institutional anti-racism. What we will do, I'm going to introduce the sessions and then our speaker first, and then the speakers will do a brief visual description of ourselves for anybody who is visually impaired, any of our colleagues who are visually impaired. And then our speakers will have individual contributions that are each around 10 to 15 minutes. And then after that, the five of us here will have a discussion responding to the themes and issues that have been brought up within the presentations. So this year's exec curated panel responds to the formation of the Revolution or Nothing Network for Black and Global Majority Scholars in Theater and Performance Studies and the collective open letter, White Colleague Listen. It builds on other exec conversations that have happened and conversations within the exec over the last year about what the shared values of TaPRA are. And many of you will have been present also at the exec curated panel at Exeter in now a lifetime ago, 2019, isn't it? So that was the last conference that we had. So this panel is seeking to give presence to the affective, embodied, and experiential dimensions of structural racism in higher education institutions. We're exploring the dimension of institutional racism that's not easily theorizable. So the background noise of racial slights, insults, and minimizations that Black people of color and people of the global majority face, despite or perhaps especially in light of the good intentions and gestures to allyship that we have also seen. The curated panel has two parts. So I'm hoping that everybody had a message about the pre-circulated video podcasts or mainly audio podcast with myself, Mojisola Adebayo, and Royona Mitra. If you haven't, the link is in your shed schedule. It's in the description of this panel itself. That link is it's an unlisted YouTube video, and you can watch that until the end of the conference on Friday. It's not a prerequisite to have watched it before you come to this panel, so you feel free to catch up with it afterwards. That conversation builds on work that Mojisola, Royona, and I had done for the Irish Society of Theatre Research back in May. So to introduce our speakers today, we have joining us from Vancouver, Canada, where it is very early in the morning. We have Olivia Michiko Gagnon. She is assistant professor in the Department of Theatre and Film at University of British Columbia, or UBC. She writes and teaches across performance studies, critical race theory, queer and feminist theory, and critical indigenous studies. And she's currently working on her first monograph, which theorizes closeness as a minoritarian method of doing history through art and performance and beyond archival stricture. Her writings appeared in ASAP Journal, Canadian Theatre Review, Hemispherica, Syndicate, and Women in Performance, a Journal of Feminist Theory, where she was managing editor from 2017 to 2019, and is co-editor with James McMaster of a special issue titled The Between Couple Forms Performing Together. And I was so happy to be, myself and Errol Lane were published by Olivia and James in that issue, as well as attending the conference that they held at NYU, which was a brilliant event, actually. Olivia has also written for the Vancouver Art Gallery with Monica King Gagnon and the New Museum. She was formerly managing editor of HemiPress at the Hemispheric Institute of Performance and Politics in New York City. She received her PhD from the Department of Performance Studies at NYU. So that is Olivia. Our second speaker will be Tia-Monique Uzor. And she is a dance scholar and practitioner who is interested in themes of identity, pop culture, resistance, and Black feminism within African and African diasporic dance. Her research critically engages Africanist dance as a vehicle for creating and interrogating African and African diasporic worlds through interdisciplinary approaches and embodied research. Her HRC and Midlands for City funded PhD practices of rooting and spaces of performative becoming and exploration of British Caribbean identities through dance, conducted the first extended analysis of identity formation within the choreography of British Caribbean diasporic artists. Tia-Monique has both presented and taught her work internationally as published within collections in the fields of dance, geography, and Black feminism. Currently, she's a dance history postdoctoral research assistant for Dunham's Data, Catherine Dunham in Digital Methods for Dance Historical Inquiry, and that is at the Royal Central School of Speech and Drama. And she is a postdoctoral research fellow in the School of Geography, Earth, and Environmental Sciences for creative approaches to race and insecurity in the Caribbean and the UK at the University of Birmingham. Finally, Mélissandre Varin is our final speaker. Relation, displacement, multiplicity, and identity, interdependency, and language emerge from Mélissandre's work. Making from an Afro and Caribbean diasporic context, Mélissandre adds layers of complexity through a situated Black feminism. Through poetic performance arts, moving image assemblages, and site-specific installations, among other things, Mélissandre interrogate how the encounter between bodies that have been marginalized, everyday materials, and institutional spaces transgresses normativity. They are commissioned nationally and internationally. Mélissandre co-parents at 2 years old, Ao. They currently work on BOOK, or Building Our Own Knowledge, a healing station, library, art, and rest, supported by Coventry Biennale. They prepare transnational Afrofeminist performances, are the curator of Open Call part of theater studies in theater performance, and are a Coventry Art Space Advisory Group member. And then finally joining us from the recorded podcast, we have Royona Mitra, who is a reader in dance and performance cultures at Brunel University, London, where she is also Associate Dean of Equality and Diversity for the College of Business, Arts, and Social Sciences. She's the author of Akram Khan, Dancing New Interculturalism, which was awarded the 2017 De La Torre Bueno First Book Award by the Dance Studies Association. Her scholarship contributes to discourses on new interculturalism, anti-racism, and decoloniality in dance and theater studies. And she is a member of Revolution or Nothing, a network for Black and global majority scholars in UK dance, theater, and performance studies, and an advocate for coalitional approaches towards anti-oppression in the academy. So we will do a quick visual description of ourselves. To introduce myself, which I don't think I did, my name is Broderick Chow, and I am a reader and the Director of Learning, Teaching, and Inclusion at the Royal Central School of Speech and Drama. My pronouns are he and him. I am a Southeast Asian man in my late 30s, and I'm currently wearing a barong Tagalog, which is a sheer and embroidered garment that is the national garment of the Philippines, and I am sitting currently in my living room. And a visual description will pass on to Olivia.
Thank you, Broderick. My name is Olivia Michiko Gagnon. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a mixed race, white and Japanese Canadian woman in my early 30s, speaking from my living room on the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. I have short curly hair and I am wearing a dark gray button down with no collar.
Tia-Monique.
Okay. Hi everyone, my name is Tia-Monique Uzor and my pronouns are she, her. I'm in my early 30s. I'm a brown-skinned British Caribbean diasporic woman with short afro hair. I'm wearing a short sleeve turtleneck yellow t-shirt, and I am speaking from my office in Leicester City in the UK.
Mélissandre.
Hi everyone. Yeah, I'm Mélissandre. I'm a Black gender fluid person. I'm wearing what is it? A top, a shiny black top. I'm trying to do the exercise without notes. I have 3 hoops on my face. So I have a left hoop in the left ear. a left nose piercing and a septum piercing as well. I have like messy, short black hair that are braided and that I need to redo. My hair are shaved on the sides. What else about me? I look really tired, but I always do.
Thanks, and Royona.
Thank you, Broderick. Hi, everyone. I'm Royona Mitra. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a brown Indian woman in my early 40s, clinging on to the early 40s, early bit. Speaking to you from home from my home in Buckinghamshire. I'm wearing an orange sari with a paisley black and white printed border. I have long black hair and I am wearing it down, and I've got on a pair of black glasses as well.
Thank you. And so this session, I should say, has been conceived of as a session that focuses on listening. So you'll notice that the chat is disabled for you. The format of the podcast was explicitly to take away some of the visuals and to focus on listening itself. So we are not going to have the typical Q&A format, but rather once the three presentations have concluded, we are going to, Royona and I will facilitate a conversation on the themes and issues that have arisen from it. So that is the format of our session today. Thank you all for joining, and I am going to pass on now to Olivia for the first presentation.
Thanks, Broderick. So hi, everyone. Can everyone hear me okay? I realize I'm not wearing a mic. Okay, great. So I want to start by thanking my colleagues for the generous invitation to join them today and for their brilliant and powerful collaborative offering, which I'm incredibly grateful for. So thank you, Broderick, Royona, and Mojisola, who can't be with us today. And thank you also, Tia-Monique and Mélissandre. I'm really honored to be in conversation with you and to share virtual space. Thank you also to Joe and Bo for making this event possible, helping us troubleshoot our tech, and for making the event more accessible. So I'm joining you today from the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. And this is a place that I'm fairly new to and still have much to learn about as I work to become a better, though perpetually uninvited guest in this place. We've been invited today to reflect from our specific institutional and identitarian positionings on the climate, or to use my colleague's evocative language, drawing on Christina Sharp's, the weather of institutional racism. This language offers a rich affective vernacular for making sense of our very different embodied experience of that which traffics in supposed neutrality, that which obsessively tries to conceal its own markedness through the instantiation of a norm, thus becoming the supposedly unmarked grounds upon which everyone else is to be measured, visualized, and marked. Just like ethnomusicology appears against the backdrop of musicology, or global performance streaked across something we call theater. I am, of course, talking about whiteness, and as my colleagues have quoted Sarah Ahmed, specifically its institutionalization in the academy, in part through the organizing of flows of affects and resources between particular bodies and not others. I, for my part, don't believe that institutions like the university can be fundamentally reformed, because I believe that they are mostly fundamentally white supremacist and colonial architectures grounded in exploitation and extraction at once material, intellectual, epistemological, and emotional. And my sense of many EDI initiatives in the Canadian context is that they are too often grounded in additive logics of inclusion and reductive models of tokenistic representation. And this is not in any way to devalue or invisibilize the very real labor of so many minoritarian colleagues who practice decolonization and anti-racism, disability justice, and queer feminist intervention as they work to render our spaces more livable for faculty, students, and staff, those already present and those we are so desperate to have join us. But I think my point here is that EDI, which is to say, and I'm referring specifically to the institutionalization or the institutional shape of a certain kind of justice work, does not in fact feel like justice much of the time. It's just that EDI often feels slanted toward optics, feels like it's a matter of managing someone else's bad feelings about a changing landscape, even as you are expected to suppress your own, which means that EDI sometimes feels like a new weather of whiteness, but one now slanted toward the expression of a supposed desire to learn, do better, be an ally. As such, EDI conversations often seem to swirl endlessly around a point they never land on, extracting energy from faculty of color whose speech is expected to take place unhindered within flurries of micro and non-micro aggressions, as well as the gendered and racialized system of tenure and rank. And this is to say nothing of a particular brand of Canadian politeness which bolsters racism in its own way. The deep frustrations and nagging fatigue that I feel must, however, always be thought in relation to my own mixed raceness, which is also to say my proximities to whiteness. And indeed, it is in part this bothness, my racialization and my whiteness, that makes it critical and in some instances possible for me to keep coming back to the broken table, trying to mobilize my privilege and my insights toward transformation while also engaging my own complicities, the things that I am still struggling to perceive and be accountable to. And from amidst this tangle, what I really want to talk to you about today are the places in the university where I do think life can happen, where transformation does unfurl its beautiful tendrils. And as I sit, as I'm sure many of us do, on the precipice of another school year made already chaotic and grief-ridden by COVID and by my institution's failure to effectively develop a plan grounded in equitable access and harm reduction, I find myself still deeply moved and motivated by what can happen in the classroom, specifically what anti-racist, minoritarian performance studies pedagogy might make possible. Because this, for me, is why I work in a university, to teach. It's my most important job, and it's why I'm glad to be here today, grateful for those whom it has placed me into proximity with, for the feminist mentorship I've received, for the department that indelibly shaped me. So huge shout out to performance studies at NYU, a minoritarian home to so many, and thankful for the lessons of my mentor, Diana Taylor, who teaches like no other how to make the institution and its resources work for you. Another way of saying all of this is that although I don't believe in institutions, I do believe in the spaces of joy, community, brilliance, and repair that I have found in what Fred Moten and Stefano Harney might call the undercommons, where many of us come together to and remake ourselves, to learn and unlearn together, to dream critically, and to build something different in the long shadow of institutionalized white supremacy. The university is a fantastic gathering of resources. So in the words of Moten and Harney, we are learning how to steal from it, how to revolt against it from where we stand. For me, the classroom is one of these places of possibility. So in the time I have left, I want to offer up 3 short reflections grounded in questions of pedagogy and teaching, racism and anti-racism, and then I'll leave it at that. So I'm going to try to share my screen. Can everybody see that?
Yes.
Thanks. Okay, so 1, more than a syllabus. Given my frustrations with many of the current EDI models in the Canadian context, just because that's where I'm situated, so I can't speak outside of the context that I know, it seems inevitable to raise the question of the syllabus, especially given resounding calls to diversify and decolonize syllabi, to add artists and writers of color to curricula previously blanketed in whiteness as snow. But this additive model feels insufficient to me, not only because it reproduces that which I have already railed against in the first section of this talk, or because it usually offers but a meager shift in what otherwise remains the same, or because adding a new text or performance to your course in no way guarantees that you will be equipped to teach it, but because what we teach must be clasped to how we teach. And so the transformation of previously all-white syllabi, a transformation which, to be clear, I wholeheartedly support, must be coupled with a reorientation of our pedagogical methods so that anti-racism, decolonial thought, queerness, feminism, and access are not just our content, but also our daily practice, and one that we practice with our students. Can we imagine, for example, to invoke the brilliant Julietta Singh teaching against mastery, against anti-Black and colonial logics of property and possession? Can we imagine inviting students into modes of listening, reading, and writing that don't undergird accumulation, capture, or epistemological domination? And for more on this, you can check out the sort of really brilliant Dylan Robinson's work on hungry listening. Could we be traitors to whiteness, to cite my colleague's question, and teach perhaps even against our own training for some of us? Could we center not only multiple epistemologies, but unlearning and unknowing at the heart of our work? Because part of what this can unfold is the real violence of knowledge accrual and production and hoarding that the university has and continues to traffic in ways that do real harm to real people then and now. Performance has something to offer this conversation, I think, and that is in part. Performance has something to offer this conversation, I think, and that is in part because the pressure that performance places on representation, what we think it can do, what we think its political horizons might be, could not be more urgent in a moment where debates over good and bad representation abound and promises of inclusion seem ever more hollow. As Amber Jamila Musser writes, quote, though diversity and inclusion are the prevailing paradigms for increasing the representation of people of color in predominantly white spaces, they can veer toward the fetishization of minorities largely because possession of visible difference reflects well on the institution in that it signals a particular commitment to so-called social good. Now, she insists, is the time to rethink the question of representation, to reimagine what it might look, feel, sound, or move like. And performance, through its attention to the affective, embodied, sensuous, sonic, and felt dimensions of difference, might give us tools to imagine what lies on the other side of our current, and I would say rather limited, politics of representation, even as it stages the conditions under which the process of coming into visibility unfolds. This is all to say that I think performance can help us think atmospherically and methodologically beyond logics, current logics of EDI, about what anti-racism, what justice might really feel like for everyone in a place like the classroom. 2, the bodies in the room, the body at the front of the room. That said, who is in the room matters, as does who sits at the proverbial front, situated as the one in charge, the one who must inevitably call the room to order. Here, representation really matters in the sense that some bodies have historically been positioned as bearers of knowledge and power, while others have been cast aside, or worse, been marked as objects of study. When I walk into a classroom, then, I have to be responsible to all of that, to how power and history, privilege and difference mark and shape my body, which I imagine is read in a multitude of different ways by different students, as well as how these things mark their bodies, even as they read one another and I read them. The bodies in the room do matter. The students who lead, are quiet, the ones who speak, walk out, complain, the teacher who gets taken seriously and the one always being undermined, the one who has to worry about how they dress and the ones who are not sure what I'm referring to. Because difference shapes every interaction in the classroom, not only in courses that are supposedly about race or gender or sexuality or disability or class. It's all always already there. And when we bring minoritarian performance studies pedagogy, explicit engagements with difference, embodied reflexiveness into our spaces, these dynamics can come to the fore and become a critical part of our work together. Not least of all because the students are in a state of becoming, they are, but because we are an ephemeral community that is never static, but always in a process of changing as we try to bring our whole selves into the room. 3, teaching toward with. Recently, I've been explicitly framing my own work as a writing with rather than a writing about, for multiple reasons, but one of the most pressing being that as a non-Indigenous scholar who often engages with the work of Indigenous artists, or who in general engages the work of artists with different identity coordinates than my own, writing about too often reperforms and reinstantiates the violence of ethnographic practice, its white colonial gaze, its modes of narration and knowledge production. So part of writing with and thinking with is about a relational ethics of accompaniment, which for me means refusing any kind of mastery, which, as Singh reminds us, is the scholarly tradition that most of us, I think, have been trained in, refusing any kind of masterful narration of the works and instead trying to parse the questions that the works raise, the visions of the world that they might propose, but in ways that intentionally leave the gaps wide open and keep me in the frame, not to center myself, but to situate myself as me, a mixed race, white, Japanese, and Japanese Canadian settler woman who comes to all of this thinking and writing and making through my own embodied histories of race, gender, sexuality, and class. One of the questions that I've been mulling over is how to translate this practice into the classroom. This is to say, how do I teach toward a politics of with? If the traditional model of teaching marks me as the fountain or bearer of knowledge, how might I perform this role differently, anchoring myself in non-mastery while still holding the room and acknowledging my unique responsibility in making the environment possible for everyone else? As I say to my students, we are all responsible for co-creating this space, but my role in that process is different, is heavier than yours. Because a politics of with cannot disavow the power that I do hold, right? Nor can it disavow, I would add, the ways in which, right, some bodies, as I mentioned earlier, are going to be read as already sort of inherently containing more authority than others when they enter the classroom. But it can work to mitigate and reshape the power that I do have into newly energized forms. In some ways, then, a politics of with gestures towards a kind of ethically modulated leveling, but I want to insist that it is more than the sometimes facile way in which a teacher might insist that they learn more from their students and their students learn from them, although, to be clear, I have learned an impossible richness from my students. Rather, a politics of with takes seriously that something is being worked out here between all of us in the present, in this room, and that the troubled shape of our we, to cite Jean Vaccaro, is not something that we can determine in advance, nor is it something that will necessarily come to us easily. I'll end with this. I think that teaching is my most important job. And given the catastrophic climate in which we find ourselves, where weather indexes both devastating racism and the collapsing ecosystems that extractive capitalism, white supremacy, and colonialism have precipitated with impunity, my only task in the classroom at this stage is to radicalize the students who graciously decide to share space and time with me. And in turn, their presence and their knowledges transform me, radicalize me, and remake me endlessly, time after time. Radicalize can mean different things, but for me, it certainly means insisting on the clasp of arts and politics, organizing and intellectual labor, naming our project as world-making that wants whiteness and coloniality's abolition, helping them to articulate nuanced, historically grounded questions, to critique the institution and unlearn together our most insidiously embedded paradigms, to think deeply and slowly and with profound generosity, to act in service always of the most vulnerable in our communities, to weave an ethical framework into all of our intellectual and artistic work, to center questions of difference in everything we do or think or write, and to maintain that difficulty, which is not always the same thing as harm, is not always only an obstacle to our work, but often is part of our work, this work of sociality, this minoritarian being together in difference. Because being with others in a classroom or an organizing basement or at a march can be challenging, but it can also be one of our most beautiful collective undertakings. So when I say radicalize, perhaps all I mean is practicing methods for thinking and feeling and listening in new shapes together in order to open up other possibilities for freedom and justice, dreaming and co-created minoritarian life, not sometime off in the future, but here and now where we so desperately need it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Olivia. That was very powerful. And next, I'm going to pass over to Tia-Monique Uzor.
Good afternoon, everyone. I would also just like to echo my deepest gratitude for being part of this panel. Thank you to Mojisola, to Royona, to Broderick, and to my fellow panelists. I have something to share with you today, and yeah, slightly different for me, but I hope it will provoke something. My name is Tia-Monique Uzor. It used to be Tia-Monique Pilgrim. My surname now is Ebo due to marriage, but before this, I bore the name of the Scottish colonial master who raped and enslaved my ancestors in Jamaica. I'm an early career researcher who's interested in the intersections around African and African diasporic dance. I'm also a trained dancer. I grew up in Essex in the UK in a single parent home. I am a mother. And I'm someone who is struggling to navigate this academic world. Today, I want to share with you from this space. Hopefully this works. Rain. I can't stand the rain.
Me, I'm super fly, super duper fly, super duper fly. Me, I'm super fly, super duper fly, super duper fly. Me, I'm super fly, super duper fly, super duper fly. Me, I'm super fly.
Racism is like rain. Either it's raining or it's gathering somewhere. Racism is like rain, either it's raining or it's gathering somewhere, is a painting by Mary Lovelace O'Neill. The painting, which on one side has a minimalist grey block of colour, and the other a burst of colours, shapes and strokes in acrylic, was created in 1993 by O'Neill out of the urge to feel the, quote, living, breathing in and out that was offered by canvas on a stretcher bar, and the lickable, kissable, sensuous oil paint palette. As a dancer of Africanist forms, I thirst for the feeling of my undulating spine connecting with my hips and shoulders, grounding me to the earth beneath my feet, the pulsating rhythm of the drum moving through my body and unifying me to every other dancing body around me. My home is my body. It is here that I am most connected with every version of myself, past, present, and future. It is here that I receive ancestral, spiritual, and cultural knowledge through my dance practice. I can't stand the rain. Racism is like rain. Either it's raining or it's gathering somewhere. In 2018, I sat in a meeting I had called to confront an academic who had taken a title and concept of a paper that I had been developing and disseminating on the conference circuit. Their paper had just been approved for publishing in a high impact journal in our field. There was no citation. I was a PhD student at the time and was extremely nervous about the implications of this conversation. The person's response to me was to deny everything and attribute the work to other scholars. Frantic Google searches ensued. Then came the offers of a permanent role at the institution and the promise to help me also publish in that high impact journal. As this one-sided negotiation ensued, I remained silent. I felt myself leaving my body. I was above myself, looking down to see my expressionless face sitting in that office. I saw myself get up and leave. I can't stand the rain. Racism is like rain. Either it's raining or it's gathering somewhere. Of course, as a Black woman who grew up in the deep depths of Essex, I understand what it is to experience what Du Bois articulated as double consciousness. Racism is the condition under which I am allowed to survive in this country, because it was never intended that I would survive. The compounding intersectional impacts of class, race, sex, gender, and the power structures of higher education caused me to leave my body that day. And as of yet, I have not been able to return. I can't stand the rain. Racism is like rain. Either it's raining or it's gathering somewhere. Listening to Broderick, Mojisola, and Royona share their thoughts on racism as rain, I began to think about rain. It's always raining in this country. And despite having grown up here, I'm still getting caught out. Still, I indulged in an insistent hope that a warm, dry day will really just be a warm, dry day. But that's not the case. In the UK, there is a constant threat of rain. just like there's a constant threat of racism. As O'Neill observed, racism is like rain. Either it's raining or it's gathering somewhere. The rain of racism in HE settings is unpredictable, unforecastable, and never ceases to surprise. It is the one thing, however, that is certain. I can't stand the rain. Racism is like rain. In her writing on the pervasiveness of anti-Blackness as climate and weather, Christina Sharp turns to breath as a necessity to life. I too have been ruminating on breath, particularly breathlessness, and the privilege to be able to walk into a room and breathe freely. We all remember Eric Garner's cries, I can't breathe, I can't breathe. The confrontation I had in 2018 only deepened and came to a head in 2020. Through it all, I could not catch my breath, and at times I realized I was holding it. The experience of being outside my body and not being able to breathe is what I believe Sharp is referring to as being in the wake, inhabiting a consciousness where somewhere between living and death, a consciousness created by the refusal of Black humanity. And as wakes are synonymous with mourning, I have been in mourning, not necessarily for myself, but for the institution. I grieve the loss of trusted friendships, the loss of collaboration, the so-called allyship, and what could have been created, what could have been dismantled. I can't stand the rain. Racism is like rain. Either it's raining or it's gathering somewhere. So why am I sharing this? I'm clearly still in the process of, I'm clearly still processing my experiences from that time. I take lead from my ancestors first, and then from Christina Sharp, Edouard Glissant, Bell Hooks, and many other scholars who understand that voicing our pain is just the beginning, that it must produce something, we must come to something, and we do. Hooks talks about coming to voice, and elsewhere I've extended her work to think about coming to movement. In her work, Hooks speaks about self-recovery as a process of healing to become whole again. I'm clearly in the process of self-recovery, of returning to my body within spaces that cause me to flee. However, I take seriously Hooks' insistence that uncovering pain must be linked to strategies for resistance and transformation. Hooks says, and I quote, "We must envision the university as a central site for revolutionary struggle, a site where we can work to educate for critical consciousness, where we can have a pedagogy of liberation. Yet how can we transform others if our habits of being reinforce and perpetuate domination in all its forms, racism, sexism, class, exploitation?" This returns us to the issue of self-recovery, extending it to include models of personal transformation that address both oppressor and oppressed, end quote. I know the recovery of myself will inevitably be found in dance practice, as I start to once again feel the call of what O'Neill recognized as something living and breathing on her canvas. So I just want to share. Saidiya Hartman describes dance as a line of flight, dancing as an effort to make what is uninhabitable livable, to bring air into an airless room, to be able to breathe. My personal transformation, however, must include both oppressor and oppressed. I can't stand the rain. I can't stand. I can't stand in the rain. I can't stand the rain. Racism is like rain. Either it's raining or it's gathering somewhere. So let's gather together somewhere else. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tia-Monique. And finally, Mélissandre.
Hi. So it's going to take me maybe 10 seconds to share the file I would like to share with you. Just a second. and some more silence for 11 minutes, actually. Could someone just tell me if you can see?
Yes, we can.
Big screen and everything?
Yeah, full screen.
We will not consult us, an overdreams of transformative justice by Adrienne Mary Brown. I read. Our current collective circumstances require us to think about death, to grieve, and to consider that everything we have known must change or come to an end. Undercommons, Creative Planning and Black Studies by Stefano Rami and Fred Morton. I read. If they ask you, tell them we are flying. Knowledge of freedom is in the invention of escape, stealing away in the confine, in the form of wreck. This is a hell close, the open song of the ones who are supposed to be silent. If they ask you, tell them we are flying. This bridge hold my back. Writings by radical women of color. Edited by Sherry Mowaga and Gloria Anzaldúa. Text by Joe Carrion. And when you leave, take your pictures with you. Our white sisters, radical friends, love to hold pictures of us. Sitting at the factory machine, wielding a machete, in our bright bandanas, holding brown, yellow, black, red children, reading books from literacy campaign, holding machine gun, bayonet, bomb knife. Our white sisters, radical friends, should think again. Our white sisters, radical friends, love to phone pictures of us, walking to the field in hot sun, with straw hat on head in brown, bandana black, bright embroidered shirt, holding brown, yellow, black, red children, reading books from literacy campaign, smiling. Our white sisters, radical friends, should think again. No one smiled at the beginning of the descent, digging for souvenir chunks of uranium, of cleaning up after our white sisters, radical friends. And when our white sisters, radical friends, see us in the flesh, not as a picture they own, they are not quite after if they like us as much. We're not as happy as we look on their wall. And when you leave, take your pictures with you. À nos humanités révoltées, by Kémy, donnez son temps, plus jamais. Impatiente, elle sort de l'ascenseur, bloquée, maintenue au sous-sol, incapable d'attendre, de contempler l'impasse, une minute de plus, lui donner son temps, plus jamais. Plus jamais. Acculée par la faim, qui joue la funambule, sur le mur qui la retient prisonnière. Elle s'oblige à la déraison. Dans son dos, l'histoire hurle, les échos, les marches, la poussent à courir, dessiner ses propres escaliers, tracer une courte échelle pour que d'autres emboîtent pas. Savoir peut-être pose des bombes sur le plafond de verre. Les mots rebondissent, brisent, un silence qui étrangle. Dans ses poings serrés, le désir de justice, et ses doigts ensanglantés effleurent le ciel libéré. Ne plus se faire, chuchoter, ne plus chuchoter, demander, ne plus demander, réclamer, ne plus réclamer, créer. Whispering instead of being silent, demanding instead of whispering, reclaiming instead of demanding, creating instead of.
Oui.
Can you see me? I found you back. So now I would like to share a series of endnotes that I've never took the time to edit. Extraction of Knowledge, which is the film that you just saw, interrogates racial capitalism that undervalues certain forms of knowledge, certain bodies, certain practices more than others. Self-reproducing racial capitalism that frames my body as a site, as sites of extraction. Complicated vision of racism that do not require quotes nor long arguments, none of that. A direct critique of white cis-heteropatriarchy within the asepticized space of house of knowledge, aka white universities. Unsettling may be upsetting. We are asking to consider how Black and global majority beings, and particularly Black artists and researchers, labor is also continually extracted to bring what is hidden to light, and how such modes of exchange such as this panel conversation, could interrogate, challenge, and transform how institutional anti-racism is felt/discussed within institutions. It's not a badge or a star sticker for self-appointed good allyship. In this work, I'm most interested in hyper-localized and globally connected spider webs. I'm gonna skip that. Yeah. And so this summer, I got stuck with this one last quote for the end. I got stuck with this passage from Bell Hooks. And you can find it in Love, New Visions by Bell Hooks. So there is this sentence that says, whether we learn how to love ourselves and others will depend on the presence of a loving environment. And so when we're talking about anti-racism or what, the possibilities of producing, doing, contributing to anti-racist work within institutions, I'm wondering if maybe we're not trying to disrupt a vicious circle from the wrong end, and if we should rather look at how to create loving environments rather than fixing the unfixable. So that's it for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mélissandre.
thank you so much, so much to Olivia, Tia-Monique, and Mélissandre for those incredibly powerful and incredibly moving sharings. Broderick and I are just going to suggest that we take 5 minutes, a break. I think we all need to just sit with it, all of us, but particularly the speakers who've shared. So it's now 14:54, and we'll come back at 14:59, and we will then have a conversation between ourselves. Thank you. Welcome back, everyone. Please feel free, if you would like to turn your videos on, and equally, if you would prefer not to, that's okay. So for the remaining half hour, roughly, of this session, the plan is for us to move away from a kind of, as Broderick mentioned earlier, a more traditional Q&A format, keeping in line with the word that's come up repeatedly and the image of extraction, and moving away from that model to a sharing between the five of us. I just wanted to, I want to start off again by thanking you three for your incredibly moving and very powerful offerings. I needed those 5 minutes to just work out where to move from here. And I feel like the best way for myself to process what I've listened to is perhaps to think of some key words or key themes that kept propping up through all of them, but also as a collective whole. And I'm just going to pick up some words across the three sharings. So harm reduction, extraction, as I said, radicalize, and this notion of radicalization, our whole selves, teaching a politics of with, the undercommons, a loving environment, and thinking through how all of those ideas takes me to a point to, take me to a point to think about what would it be like to be in this conversation amongst ourselves, and not in a resistive relationship to whiteness, to our white institutions, to our white structures. How would those same conversations be if we were simply just talking to ourselves on Zoom, or ideally in a room? So I think what stays with me is that notion of love, is that notion of joy, is that notion of care, and finding those, again, going back, Olivia, to your thoughts on, yes, institutions are fundamentally impossible to reform, but even within those spaces there are moments for us to find the joy and the love and the care and the connection, which has really stayed with me as a kind of connective thread across all three. And Tia-Monique, in your thinking around coming to movement as one of those ways of coming to the space of joy as a connective power. So I'm going to stop, because this was my way of trying to connect everything that I've listened to, and I'm going to pass over to Broderick, maybe to set us off in conversation.
Thank you, Royona, for that. I'm thinking now around to build on this theme that's come up around spaces for a loving environment. That has been the final words and thoughts that Mélissandre has left us with. A loving environment, and finding that within institutions, we know is very, very difficult, but potentially loving relationships that occur, that are having coalition, and maybe actually getting away from some of the more kind of incentivized words. I'm thinking here, one of the things I've been kind of mulling over as allyship becomes this buzzword within institutions, and is a kind of necessary part of our thinking, that there's like a step beyond allyship that needs to happen that we never talk about, which is friendship. And I think that is something that is very different, and is maybe one of those words which, if we were really practicing a politics of it, would be truly transformational. I like allyship. I kind of know when somebody's an ally because they declare it, right? It's like something that you name for yourself and you have to say it, but it always feels very, it could be very conditional. It's like, you're an ally until you're not. And it's also very, if not incentivized, it's always focused on an end goal. And in a similar way, even though I kind of like the turn towards accomplices, like accomplices, not allies, I also think that has a kind of end goal too, in the idea that you're dismantling something, which is great. But we know how big the task of dismantling white supremacy is going to be, and without that, we can't wait in some ways for that to happen. So we also need to learn to live in the present, which was very present within all three presentations. So I think that friendship is that kind of missing and perhaps excluded word from our discourse, because a friend is a relationship which is not focused on an end goal. Actually, there's very little to do. It's about passing time in a way that is actually unstructured, and is not focused on necessarily an activity, even though that activity sometimes happens. And what if we were to think about that mode of being and being with and relating to other people as the start of transformative potential, because we're not actually sure what's going to happen. But at the same time, you really know it, don't you? Like, when somebody's your friend, if they're going to be a friend. Well, at least we hope that. And of course that can change, who knows, but a true friend is one that feels a lot less conditional than an ally or an accomplice. So that was my opening thought. I wondered if anybody wanted to build. Tia-Monique.
Yeah, I was just thinking about, what you're saying about friendship, and resonating so much, because I think especially, people come into academia at different times. And so I've just been here since I was like 18, since I finished my training. And so there is a sense of journeying through life and growing up with certain people, and we see each other over years, and that friendships can build. But I really have a question just in thinking about what Olivia was offering us in the power dynamics, in this sense of, I think you said like the master or the genius at the front, those dynamics, how that automatically shifts and disables any type of true friendship that we can have with people in different fields, maybe different universities, because those inherent power structures, unless you and the other person are actively trying to dismantle them for yourself, and even if you have the position, how true can a friendship be within that system?
I can just add on to that. I also, the friendship resonates with me so much. I think I was saying before we started that we had a kind of core values workshop in my department, and one of the questions was, what do you need to thrive? And mine was friendship, actually, right? Like, that is the thing that can kind of animate and sustain that kind of the sort of academic labor that we all perform in various ways. And I was also remembering that my very dear friend and brilliant colleague, James McMaster, when we were organizing for Sanctuary Campus as grad students, we used to say, the best way to organize is through friendship. You got to go make friends with people, and then you got to bring them in, and then you got to convince them to come to a meeting. And that actually, like, that friendship does have this like really political mechanism. And so yes to friendship. And also, just echoing Tia-Monique, I think this thing about the prohibitive nature of the kind of hierarchies that permeate the university. I mean, I think about it with rank, right? Like junior faculty, senior faculty, when you know someone's going to be on your tenure committee, it's like, how free will you ever feel to really say the thing? And then, of course, there are exceptions, but there's always that kind of anxiety and trepidation. which is putting it's causing problems for the desire to produce those really sort of empowering social spaces, I think. So yeah, I'll just leave it at that.
Just bouncing back, and also I didn't say thank you to anyone previously. Thank you. I'm so happy to be here and to become your friends. So yeah, just saying that also when we talk about friendship, and especially when it is in the context of in an academic context, I think it's also very important to make sure that we understand friendship in a sort of a similar way. And for me, I think it could be a valuable twist from coalition, allyship, kind of buzzword, if only we understand friendship from an anarchist relationship framework. So there's no one way to be a good friend to someone, and we should welcome the fluidity of our feelings. And how do we do that within the academia? I have no idea. But that's just what I wanted to add for this friendship cafe discussion.
Royona?
Okay, a very quick thought. It was really in response to when, Broderick, you were introducing the idea of friendship, and you said it's a word that is often left out of this discourse. And long may it be left out, I think, because if the institution catches onto it, it's inconvenient for them to think about friendship, because actually it undermines the hierarchies they want to keep in place, I think. So if anything, if we want to move towards the place of friendship, which is a wonderful idea, may it not be institutionalized. I guess my plea is, how do we keep hold of that as a generative force for ourselves, but not hand it over in the way that allyship has been handed over, et cetera, to institutional language. Yeah, it's just a quick.
And Tia-Monique, you were...
No, I was just beginning to reflect on my own kind of tensions, even of having a PhD, and how that you're doing a PhD, it's I'm going to be a doctor, I'm going to be a doctor, I'm going to be a doctor. And then as soon as I got it, I was like, oh my gosh, don't anyone ever call me doctor. I don't want to I feel like it's a barrier. Whenever I hear people say, oh, doctor, I'm I kind of wince, because I'm oh no, I really don't want to set up, as I walk into this room, this expectation. And so even the complicity that I have in having gone through this system. And also I was thinking about how friendship really allows us. I've been having a conversation with a friend lately, and how we've been speaking about accountability, and how you really can hold your friends accountable in ways that I think, because as long as we're in this relationship, there's certain things that I owe that other person and they owe me. And that's the unwritten contract of us being in a friendship. And I think, I think it is really revolutionary and radical to think about that in the context of HE settings, because it would allow a certain level of calling out, it would dissipate a lot of situations when we're just able to hold each other accountable as friends, first and foremost, without having to go through all of these systems and everyone knows what I mean, all of these other things that are just super complex and political, etc.
I wonder too also if it would, the things that our language that matters so much in terms of how we talk about each other in institutions, and how we refer to the relational dynamics that go on in institutions. And one of the things that often comes up when an institution is talking about itself is to call itself a family. Just oh no, it's a workplace, right? It's a workplace, and it should be a workplace. And also, family dynamics are really often really fucked up, and that's, something that we all know and understand. But I think what's quite interesting about friendship as a dynamic is very fluid, right? in a way much more so than family in many ways. And that kind of relational structure of friendship is one of those things that you kind of constantly have to negotiate, because you can stop being friends with somebody, and it is a choice, right? So you need to put in time, you need to invest into something. And so I guess a question here that we probably don't answer is, how do we as individuals make space to nurture those relations within institutional spaces, cross-institutional, within the field itself? How do we what are the things that we need in order to do that? For Revolution or Nothing, what was really kind of key for that, when Royona and I mean, the reason that Royona and I are quite good friends is because we worked in the same department, right? And that was like proximity of time and space, and that was the thing that caused it. But when we were thinking about how the fields of, learning where and when Black and global majority scholars, where they existed in the field, we just didn't know. So like the thing that needed to happen was the mechanism for communication, which was the kind of key. If anything, it was like the only thing that was really necessary about, the open letter was another, but it was actually just having a mechanism of communication was like very, very important. So if that's like one thing that we need to begin nurturing those relationships, what are some of those other, what do we need? Space, time. I think those are two very important things. But another thing that I wanted to bring up was this question of extraction on the one hand, which was very, very present within all of the presentations. And Olivia, your quite powerful drawing from Julietta Singh of unthinking mastery. So if extraction is the thing that that happens to Black and people of color in the institution, what would it be to unthink mastery around that? What would it do to our dynamics of extraction, to those power dynamics?
I'll just say something quickly and then I'll pass it over to my colleagues. I mean, one thing to say, just tying the friendship link with the my kind of perpetual thinking with Julietta, is that I engaged with her work first as a graduate student, and then our friendship developed out of that engagement. And the deeper our friendship has become, the more profound my engagement with her work has also been, right? So there is a kind of like that kind of intellectual, political, and the sort of affective bonds, I think is really sort of very present for me in that citation or in that engagement with her. I don't have a good answer to your question, Broderick, which is such a great one, but I think this, for me, the kind of rub of the non-mastery is that I feel both this kind of incredibly powerful ethical demand or obligation to not ground myself in a position of mastery, given the kind of ways in which in her book, right, she's thinking about the mastery over a body of knowledge as sort of intimately connected to mastery over another human being, right? That's a kind of connected genealogy. And the other side of that, when I think about teaching, right, is at the same time is like to kind of be really attuned to how performances of non-mastery read differently on different bodies, right, are embodied differently, and what the kind of risks of those non-masterful performances might be in particular spaces. Because of course there are places where we might feel actually the most politically efficacious thing in a department meeting or wherever else we may be transiting, right, is actually to be very forceful in our declaration. And how does that sit with the ethics of non-mastery that I also, think are incredibly important. And I think that's a kind of, for me, it's a kind of never-ending movement between those poles, right? But it's a great question.
Mélissandre, Tia-Monique, do you have any?
I was dreaming. Yeah, I think it's so important to shape create, nurture, and nourish spaces where Black and global majority beings, in particular, can express like rage, joy, you know, like spaces for, I'm talking about spaces for lamentation, spaces to twerk, you know, like different spaces to express like lows and highs of emotions, but having those spaces also within institutions without, but I know that there is always this risk of institution like commodifying your your emotion in this instance, but doing it no matter what, you know what I mean? Like we all have this constant fear of having our existence, our resistance being commodified by the racial capitalist system, but at the same time, you know, like some, yeah, I have to read you that quote. I have to find it and then to read it to you, but that this fears, like fear in general, shouldn't stop us from doing anything, but provides us with more spaces, with more just like that provides us with spaces for us to express the fuller versions of ourselves. And I'm going to look for this quote, but we'll say what I'm trying to say better, and then you'll understand.
I can jump in. So as you were speaking, Broderick, I just started to think about like dance, like traditional African dance training, which there is a hierarchy in there, but also some of the more the cultural hierarchies and family hierarchies kind of dissipate in that space, because if you can do it right, we're gonna so if a child is coming in and they're dancing something traditional, they're doing the undulation, for example, and they're doing it really well, everybody will that child is able to be like the master in that space, even if in other spaces they're not necessarily going to have that same agency. And so I feel like the opportunities to learn and to build connections and bonds just become so much more when, and I think what you're saying, Olivia, is true, that there needs to be a flexibility to be able to move, and just like in any other identity that we hold, to be able to move from one space to another and not always be situated in I'm this, because even, you know, sometimes you're teaching and a student asks you a question, you just don't know. You're just like, I don't know, this is a super good question, let's figure it out. And to have to be able, I think it's also about vulnerability, right? To hold that the vulnerability, to be able to say that in front of your students, to be able to kind of refuse the mastery title, and admit that your students also, in front of your students, not just behind like, oh, my students are teaching me so many things, but in front of your students, that you're teaching me a lot. Let's figure this thing out together and maybe talk about it next week. It creates such a rich and genuine environment that I think for me is the space that I want to be a part of, whether in the studio space, dance space, in the classroom, in lectures. I hate lecturing like just like a barrage of words at people. Yeah, I think it is has the potential to be really generative if we can take it on.
I think that kind of embodied practice that you just brought up, Tia-Monique, is really important, because one of the things that I always reflect on in my teaching is that I have the experience of like teaching in a classroom, you know, like lecturing, but I also have the experience of being somebody who's trained in sports training and in weightlifting specifically. And while I think that often you might characterize the training side of things, specifically with sports, as being like all about mastery and all about like, this is the coach, and then he tells you what is wrong. My experience has been very different to that. And I think the reason is because like, you can't like actually teach somebody to lift that weight. They can only learn for themselves to do it. And I feel like that's actually something that that world understands quite a lot. So I find the environment actually in some ways like a more inclusive one often than the classroom itself, because there's a sense that if you can accept that vulnerability among everyone, if there's the idea that everybody in that space is going to accept that there are certain things that they're going to fail at and fail again and again and again, then I think that the ethic of that room, that space is very, very different. And I often feel like in the classroom, and it might come back to like the unstructuring of time and space, we're often like over planning, thinking about our schemes of work, blah, blah, blah. And that's like comes from our own fear, I think, as pedagogues, as scholars. So we're over planning things in order to deliver on something. But we're not actually planning for the fact that we need unstructured time and space in order to learn, in order to transform and do something different.
Can I just quickly add something really small? I mean, this is making me reflect on so much of nervousness and reluctance and reticence amongst colleagues in order to embrace change, in order to have those difficult conversations, I think is around mastery. Because again, Olivia, as you were saying earlier, you know, if we are going to teach against our own training, that requires us to undo so much. It requires us to go into a place of vulnerability and accept that we do not know. And we are certainly not the be all and end all of this particular thing that we've specialized in. So this idea of specialism, which, you know, is ingrained into us in our own education system and our training, is what we are saying, or this conversation is suggesting we need to work against. So if there isn't that sense of I am the master of this thing, if we push against that, then we are constantly learning with our students. We are constantly learning with our colleagues, and never in a position to say we know more than you, because actually that knowledge is such a relational concept within the classroom, or at least, you know, good pedagogy should be about never thinking I am the person who owns the knowledge here and I'm delivering to you again. That concept of delivery is where it's flawed. So if we're able to take on this idea of dismantling mastery, then actually these conversations and the ideas of, yes, I can shift my reading list. Yes, I can shift the way in which I'm approaching this particular subject, even if I haven't done it for the last 20 years, because I'm not a master of anything. Would be a productive, generative way to move.
We have about 3 minutes left, and I wanted to give Mélissandre an opportunity, if you found that quotation, to read it to us.
Yeah, so it's basically Tony Kade Bambara having an interview with Kalamu Ya Salam, and they're talking about you know, vision, power, and how to dismantle the system. And Kalamu asked, do you think that fiction is the most effective way to do this? And Tony replied, no, the most effective way to do it is just to do it. And I just love it.
I feel like that's such a great point to end on. This has been a really wonderful panel. Thank you so much, Olivia, Tia-Monique, Mélissandre, for being here today. It's been fantastic. Thank you for saying yes to the invitation. It's been wonderful.